Hey guys, this is a demonstration for biological basis of behavior. I'm going to go over the basics, which is the beginning of chapter 2, maybe the end of chapter 1, primarily the end of chapter 2 for most of your textbooks. So the first part that you should know is the difference between neurons and glia. So, in the nervous system, I'm going to verbally say it. I also wrote it down for you guys to see. In the nervous system, you are only ever going to have two types of cells. That's it. You're either going to be a neuron or a glia. Neurons, in general, are the ones that do the communicating, and then glia basically support them in whatever they do. There are more glia in the nervous system than there are neurons. Neurons purely are used for communication, for responding to some type of stimulus in the environment, versus glia, there has to be many of them to be able to support the many neurons that there are. You need both of these cell types in the nervous system in order to have a balanced workload. If you're missing one, you're probably not going to work that well. So, neurons, again, are the communicator neurons. They are also called nerve cells. You could use either word. I'm going to keep saying neurons because that's what you're going to see for the rest of the semester. These are the cells that participate in communication, meaning that neurons are going to communicate with other neurons. We'll talk about how in a different session, but in general, neurons communicate with other neurons. They're going to respond to stimuli in the environment, specifically sensory stimuli. The way that they communicate is they're going to have both electricity conductance within the actual neuron itself, which I'll go over in a picture later in the presentation. And then they conduct electricity, and then they're going to communicate with other neurons via chemical messengers, also known as neurotransmitters, which we will save for a different presentation altogether. Just know in general that neurons are used for communication. You have three types of neurons. So, in the beginning I said you have two types of cells in the nervous system, neurons and glia. Each one of these has subcategories to them. The first subcategory here is the three types of neurons. You have unipolar, bipolar, and multipolar. In terms of polarity, it's talking about how many processes, or in layman's terms, how many things are coming out of the cell body. Unipolar, you have one process extending from the cell body, hence the word uni. Bipolar, you have two processes, hence the word bi. Specifically, your processes are one axon and one dendrite, and they're extending from the cell body. The cell body is also known as soma. That's why I wrote it in parentheses. Both unipolar and bipolar neurons are used to relay sensory information. Specifically, you will see bipolar neurons when you enter the vision chapter. So most of the time, unipolar, bipolar sensory information. The most common type of neuron in the nervous system is multipolar. These have multiple processes extending from the soma, so it's going to have many dendrites extending from the soma. And it has a single axon. That's pretty much it for the three types of neurons. Here is an image provided for you. Eventually. There it is. Okay, so unipolar neuron is the one in the middle. Again, here's our cell body. We have one process, one thing sticking off of our cell body. In this case, it's the axon. Bipolar, we have two processes extending from the soma, or the cell body. Here we have a dendrite, and here we have an axon. Multipolar, you have multiple things extending from this cell body. Here's our cell body. Here we are going to have our axon. That's one process. Here we have multiple dendrites extending from our cell body. That's where the multiple in one axon. Hang on, my computer just froze. Oh. Okay, I'm back. So just a quick review, unipolar, here's your cell body. You have one process, one thing extending from two processes. You have dendrites and an axon. One dendrite, one axon, I should say. Multipolar, you have one axon and multiple dendrites. Hang on, I'm waiting for the next slide to go. Okay, so you also have to know the structure of the neuron. It's going to stick with you for the rest of the semester, so knowing what these terms are going to help you further down the line. So let's start from what we already know. Anywhere you see a nucleus, that's where your cell body is. Nucleus, cell body. You will also see the term soma for cell body, S-O-M-A. They are interchangeable. They mean the same thing. Extending from your cell body, in this case, most of the time we're going to be talking about multipolar neurons. The only time you really have to worry about the other two types of neurons are when you're talking about sensory information, and even then it doesn't go in depth. So in this case, we're looking at a multipolar neuron. So here, it's multipolar. We know it's multipolar because we have multiple dendrites extending from the soma. So nucleus, soma, dendrite, 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 dendrite. Your dendrites, they function to receive messages from a different neuron. How they receive that message is a different presentation. But dendrites function to receive messages from other neurons, nearby neurons, I should say. Then extending from your soma, or your cell body, is the axon. It's really long. So extending from your cell body is the axon. Your axon is going to conduct electricity all the way down to the end, which I'll get to later. Keep in mind, you have this yellow part is myelin sheath, the rubber part of the wire. The wires are on the inside, and then the rubber part is on the outside. That rubber part helps conduct the electricity. It helps it to go faster. In between each myelin sheath, in between each yellow spot, you're going to have the node of Ranvier. And it's just Ranvier area of the axon that is unmyelinated. It's between each myelin sheath. That is going to come back when we talk about action potentials. So just keep that in mind. Node of Ranvier is important to know. Okay, so we reach the end of our axon, and then the general term for this area, they could also be called terminal buttons, or just buttons, or terminal. This is where we are going to begin to send information chemically through the use of neurotransmitters. So everything up into this point is electrical. Here, you're going to begin to have chemical messengers. Okay, so now we get into the other type of cell in the nervous system, which is glia. You could either see the term glia or neuroglia. Again, the terms are interchangeable. All glia are going to support the cells of the nervous system, meaning they are going to support the neurons. They are not going to conduct electricity. They don't do any type of communication. All they do is provide support for the neuron. You have different types of glia. You have astrocytes and Schwann cells. Astrocytes, they are important in the blood-brain barrier, and specifically for axon guidance and synaptic support, meaning that astrocytes are going to wrap around the axon and to help the neuron grow. Let's put it that way. Microglia, they're just your custodians. They are going to collect waste products from neurons. I wrote the term phagocytosis because that is the mechanism they use to clean up the waste products of the neurons, meaning they're going to eat and digest the waste products of the neurons. Then you have oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells. These two are very important. Here, professor could mix up the definitions to try and trick you, so I recommend knowing these pretty well. They both are going to produce myelin sheath. The only difference is where they produce the myelin sheath and if they can do it for one axon or multiple axons. Specifically, oligodendrocytes are going to produce myelin sheath for cells in the central nervous system, and they can myelinate more than one axon at a time. Hence the term oligo meaning few. Schwann cells are going to produce myelin sheath for cells in the peripheral nervous system, but they can only myelinate one axon at a time. The easiest way to remember this is oligo, meaning few, can myelinate more than one axon at a time, and where are you going to want to do that? In the central nervous system, because your central nervous system is, because your central nervous system consists of your brain and spinal cord. So of course you're going to want to myelinate more than one axon at a time there because it's faster. Schwann cells, not so much. It's in the periphery. You're still going to want to myelinate the axons, but you can do it one at a time because it's not as important. Okay, so just a quick overview of what we talked about today. So you have two types of cells in the nervous system. They could either be neurons or glia. Neurons are the communicators. They do the important functions of the brain. Glia are the supporters. They're going to support whatever the neurons need. Neurons, you could have unipolar, bipolar, multipolar. Remember, the polarity is talking about the number of processes that are extending from the cell body or the soma. Unipolar, you're only having one axon extend from the soma. Bipolar, you are having one axon and one dendrite extending from the soma. In multipolar, which is the most common type of neuron in the nervous system, you're going to have one axon extending from the soma and multiple dendrites extending from the soma. You should know the structure of the actual neuron itself from beginning to end and know which way electricity is conducted. It's conducted from the soma. Let's start. It goes from the dendrites to the soma to the axon to the terminal buttons. You should know that flow of information because it's going to come back in the next chapter. And then we talked about the different type of glia, and that glia are just the supporters of the neurons. All they do is provide nutrients if needed, clean up waste if needed, and produce myelin sheath. There are other types of glia that are not listed here, but these are the four main ones that your professors will go over. They don't conduct electricity, so please don't confuse a glia cell with a neuron. It's very important for you to understand the difference between oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells, because that's one question that many students confuse on the exam, because the definitions are almost the same. So, and they do the same thing. They produce myelin sheath. Just know where they produce myelin sheath and if they can produce it for one axon or for multiple axons at a time.